Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard. Welcome to another edition of the Pan-African Pyramid Show that happens here every Friday at Fairway Hotel from 5 to 8 p.m. And the recorded version of the same runs on NBC television, our partner sponsors, on Saturdays from 4 to 5. Your speaker is Andrew Irumba Katusabe. This evening, ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at the threats that are being caused by what they call climate change. And climate change is being caused by man-made activities on the land, mainly. The countries that emit pollution in the world, I can name 10 of them, that has contributed to the climate change and air pollution that we cry of today, that is gravely affecting the world. The first one are actually, most of them are the first world countries, the most developed countries. And globally, the number one polluter of the world is not Africa, is not Uganda, is not anywhere in Africa. This country is called China. China contributes 30% of the global emissions. The second country is not Uganda, is not anywhere in Africa. It is USA, United States. It puts 15%, that's the contribution it gives into the skies. So number one is China. Into the sky there, because they are so industrious, they have developed, they emit 30% of the pollution that finally affects our environment globally. Number two is USA, 15%. Number three is India. Number four is Russia. Number five is Japan, 4%. Russia is 5%. Japan at number 5 is 4%. Germany at number 6. Iran, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia. I've given 10 most polluters of the world. You can also go and do your research. What number is Uganda? And also continental is what number is Africa? So what's my argument? These same countries that pollute the most, they come and put pressure on Africa. They bring all their programs focusing on how Africa can contribute to fighting against climate change. In your mind there, if you don't know what they are doing, they seem to be telling you that you are the biggest polluters of the world, isn't it? When you see all the programs of the world, all of them are being sponsored to come to Africa and teach us how to protect our environment. Those people, China, especially America, they are sending technocrats to come and teach Africa how to protect their environment. But when you ask them how they have protected the environment, they are the biggest polluters. So what's the argument? Are they using this as a tool to the continued neocolonialism? Because they may have gone physically, but they may be around indirectly, through our leadership, through these NGOs and so on. In a Pan-African perspective, do you think any white man must teach an African on how to protect the environment? And if you know how to protect the environment, how come you are the biggest polluter of the environment? All these polluters of the world, there isn't any African country, it is them. But when they are warning the world is dying because of pollution, they are focusing on Africa. So we must really debunk that and show who should be responsible. And if we are to teach, Africa should be the ones teaching, not the other way around. So, ladies and gentlemen, is it a real threat to Africa or is it a threat to somebody else? And why are they projecting it as if it's our threat?
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
It is very important to understand this because deforestation was at the heart of European building powers. deforestation actually, like some might argue, allowed Europe to extend its power to the rest of the world, right? What other source of energy did people have at the time? Not so much. There were no petrol, coal was not like mainly manufactured yet. So the main source of energy were trees. And Europe used its trees to develop its imperialism. We need to be really clear about that, because when you come and you tell us about the NGOs that come to climate change and tell like Africa needs to do its part, they might sometimes forget to tell us that when we're planting trees here, they used to cut trees in order to build their power. It's very important we understand that power is based on also capacity to gain energy. And back in the day, Europe, energy was trees, so Europeans cut all their trees. But yet, 2 or 3 centuries after, they come here to tell you to plant some trees. I'm not saying planting trees doesn't work. I'm just here to notice like the historical parallel. We need to think of those questions. So it is important that we realize that climate justice is not just a white narrative. It's not just something that is coming out of now. It's something that has been there since a long time. It's not the first time that a generation of Africans realized that the destruction of his environment is highly correlated to the dismissing and the damaging of their own life. Not the first time. Many Pan-Africans before us, Irumba, have had those conversations. And it's really important we know. We know that according to the data and the statistics, a lot of terrible things are about to happen. We can think of the 83 possible millions refugees in Central Africa by 2050. We should ask ourselves, where would we go? Where would we go if we have to have mobility? Where would we go if we have to move away outside of this country because the certain part of the country has become unlivable? This is a real story. Ask yourself today, where would you go? Are you gonna go Sudan? Irumba, are you gonna go Congo? No. We don't know. But what we know is that it has already started. What has started? When there is like a drought in Karamoja, violence come out, right? People start suffering living. If you have too much water in Kisoro, then the hills have landslide, and on the landslide comes the onions that we eat here in Kampala. On those landslides come the Irish potato that we eat here in Kampala. So all the time, like, what we can observe is that climate change is not really, it is a real threat for the continent, that's for sure. We can observe it as here in Uganda. For now in Kampala, we must think like, it's okay, it's just a lot of big rain and less grasshopper. But the reality is that 70% of the people in this country are farmers. And those farmers are the ones that are going to suffer the most. Rural Uganda will suffer way much more than urban Uganda, but yet, the rich people that are participating to it are in the cities. We're all living our life in the cities, but the rest of the country is going to suffer. There's already 0.5 degrees Celsius more under African weather since its independence in 1960. So in 40 years, we have raised the temperature by half of a degree. It's globally, this year in 2023, is globally the hottest year in human history. It's the first time since we record weather that it's hot like this. It has created a lot of crises in Africa. I think we need to realize that it's not something we speak about in abstracto. It has to be something that we speak about in reality. In reality, the conflict in the Sahel right now, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, those coups d'etat that we spoke about all the year are also partly made because the climate that side is changing. The desert is growing, and the population of the desert, therefore, are re-asking for better and different type of formations. So the thinking of the Tuaregs, you're thinking of the Dogon, you're thinking of all those people in the desert that now are to front, like the savannah part of the continent. In West Africa, the desert is extending, and this is causing a lot of political trouble. We need also to think of when we think of climate change in this continent, we need to think also of what happened to one of the leaders of Pan-Africanism, Mr. Mugabe. We all know about Mr. Mugabe, right? What was Mr. Mugabe famous for? What is it that he did that all Pan-Africans start to look at and say, no, this man is one of us? By the way, he was a teacher like me, just saying. What did he do? Irumba, what did Robert Mugabe did, and after that we were all okay? Okay. He gave back the land to his people.
Yeah.
Remember that?
And that was bad on the side of the white part.
The British are still shaking today. They stuck in London under the rain when they wanted to continue farming in Zimbabwe. But yet, climate change played an important role in that story. Because Southern Africa was in the middle of a drought. And yes, drought have happened before. It's not anything new that there's drought in the regions, but yet that was one of the longest drought ever experienced. So when Mugabe took back the land and gave it back to his black farmers, what type of land did the black farmers find? Did they find the same profitable land that the white have used for generations? No. They found a dry land. They found a dry land. And everyone was really quick to say, look, black farmers don't know how to farm. No, that was because it was the biggest drought in the history of the region of the century. Literally the biggest drought of the century. And Mugabe had to take challenge, like the historical challenge of giving back the land to his people, the historical challenge of liberation of his people in the middle of that situation. And that ended up being a disaster. Some of those farmers definitely made it work, but much later, and a lot of people have ended up leaving the country to go and live as refugees in South Africa. South Africa, a country where white people still own like 70% of the land today. Okay, so all the time, climate change and climate justice interact with politics. There is many regime change that have happened because of climate questions. The real question, therefore, is not so much to ask ourselves, are the rain in Kisoro going to stop? No. Is the drought in Karamoja going to get better? No. The real question is, as Irumba was saying, as Irumba said, who is responsible for it? How did we get there? How did we get there, and how do we name what we live? And I think it's important that we realize that there's two answers. The answer is a mixture of capitalism and greed. And the same way this continent has not produced much of the carbon that is in the atmosphere today, this continent has not produced capitalism as it is today. This continent is a victim of it. It's a victim of the exploitation of its own resources so they can produce goods, right? Who here has taken any coltan from Congo? Is there any of you that have smuggled coltan outside of Congo? No? Have we smuggled gold outside of Congo? No? We are not the smugglers. But yet, all the time this is done, it goes somewhere in a factory outside of this continent, and it creates something, it builds something, it makes a new object. And that object, we all have it in our hands right now, smartphones, laptops. All of this creates a lot of carbon emissions, but yet, coming outside of minerals from the African continent. So when we think of giving lessons and speeches, Africa, as Irumba said, should be the one giving lessons and telling people that when we use our phone, when we use our laptop, we should not forget about the kids of Congo, but also we should not forget about the drought of Karamoja, because all of those problems are correlated. They are correlated within one segment, within one element, which is climate change and capitalism. Climate change is aimed with capitalism. There's a word that people have came with, scientists have came with to explain the situation. They call it the Anthropocene. You should write that down right now. Anthropocene. Go and make your research and try to understand what that word means. It's a new word. It has 10 years, 15 years max. It's a new buzzword. A lot of people are speaking about it, writing about it, but at the end of the day, it means one thing. The humans are responsible for climate change. But we know it's not all humans. It's a particular type of humans. It's a human that have taken a plane all around his life. It's a human that have a private car, maybe 4 or 5 cars. Fancy 4x4, Porsche Cayenne, German shit, German motors. They use a lot of fuel, and when they travel all around the world, including to visit the gorillas of Kisoro, including to visit this beautiful country that is the Pearl of Africa, all the time they emit gas emissions, and those gas emissions are responsible for the heating of the planet. None of you here have made any of those contributions personally. If you look at the history of your very own family, you are not there. You are not responsible. We are not responsible in this country for what's happening. Africa is responsible for less than 2% of carbon emissions today in the air. Only 2%. But yet, as we said earlier, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. It doesn't mean we can close our eyes on it. We're not happy about it, but it doesn't mean we close our eyes on it. And we should not close our eyes on it because it gave us a chance. As Pan-African, it gave us a chance. The chance is quite clear. Capitalism came here with colonialism and slavery. We all know that, right? We all know the deprivation he has done. We all know how he has reshaped the society to such an extent that it will create classes. It creates a national bourgeoisie that is stealing the people. It is part of all that system. Capitalism is about to fall. If we do not, we are the agents that are going to push for that change. Because we are the people, we are the humans that did not enjoy deregulating the planet. They did. The entire world did. The rich owns a lot of things. You know that, right? You know there are a lot of things that are really useless. All of this is some object that have made carbon emissions. All of this represents a small element of degradation of the environment somewhere. It is important that we know there is a direct link between the economic system and what's happening to the climate. It is important that we claim as Pan-African that climate justice is in our hands, that we are the one that should advocate for the planet because other people have not. The people that came here, that include myself, the Wazungu that came here to tell you like how to use your environment should be given lectures on how you guys use your environments. Because we have no idea about how to use an environment according to the planet needs. We have destroyed everything and we have exported that destruction. African history teaches us that those big droughts, those change will impact us. Let's not be the victim of that impact. We need to think of it as acting on that impact, arguing, advocating. If we have to change and stop using coal, what is it that we get in exchange? What is it that we receive? So we do not fall into the trap of changing the climate without changing capitalism or deregulating the two. The capitalist civilization is dying. I repeat, the capitalist civilization is dying. We have the choice to die in this boat or to create our own boat and float to the time that will come. I argue here that Pan-Africans know that they have to create their own boat rather than jumping on the sinking boat of others that is falling right now deep down in the faith of history. Thank you.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
In July 2021, Dubai makes fake rain to beat 122 Fahrenheit heat.
They made fake rain.
Yeah, fake rain in Dubai in July 2021 because it was very hot.
How did they do that?
They used drones to shoot electrical charge into the clouds to increase precipitation, and once you have precipitation, then the rain falls.
Hey.
Yeah, they did it in Dubai.
Hey.
And in August 2022, China's Hubei province seeded clouds with silver iodide rods to induce rainfall. This was artificial rainfall. So with those 2 points I've started with, of the artificial rains in Dubai and China Hubei province, I would say that climate change is not a threat to Africa. And these are my points.
It is a threat to Dubai.
I think
since they have started creating artificial rain, then it's a threat to you.
Okay. So
Actually, in Uganda right now, people are crying of too much rain.
yes, my argument is if they can create artificial rain in Dubai and Hubei province in China, so what makes you think that those global powers cannot create storms, cannot create earthquakes in different parts of Africa or the world? They have got that potential. And if we dig or if we buy into this narrative of climate change rhetoric, then that's when it becomes a threat to Africa. So I want basically to debunk that actually it's not a threat. If you look at the global climate report of for 2022, they say within the last 100 years, the Earth's temperature has only risen by 1 degree Fahrenheit.
Only one?
1 degree.
So the difference has been 1?
Yes, and if you have to convert 1 degree Fahrenheit to Celsius, it's negative 17.22 Fahrenheit. So I would say if you don't follow the fake data, then you would realize that climate change is a scam. There is an African proverb which says, until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. Like the former speaker said, if we pick into their narrative, then that is where the threat to Africa will come from. The scientific data, especially as I highlighted by peer scoping and meteorologists, is that the human activities have got little effect on climate change.
Little impact?
Yeah, little impact. Yeah, but it's there. For example, if you cut trees in the Amazon forest, which they call the lungs of the earth, of the world, you're likely to affect the climate, but minimally. Yeah, so the threat to Africa is the agenda of the climate change scam. And the powers are driving this agenda to achieve different ambitions. For example, net zero. You know, they are posturing us towards driving, electric cars. Yeah, and if you look at Africa, we've got big potential in what they call fossil fuels. I prefer to call it mineral oil because it's a mineral in the ground. So this narrative is being driven by fear. If you look at fear, F-E-A-R, I say if you write it in full, it's false evidence appearing real. Yeah, so you find that most of the markers they're using to measure the climate change is mostly from sensors or thermometers which are around cities. If I'll give an example of Kampala and say a place like Mitiana. So Kampala, because it's a city, there are so many buildings, there are so many cars. So buildings absorb energy from the sun and emit that heat. You also recall with me when you run a car engine, after some time it's very hot. So cities are likely to be warmer than far-off places like say Mitiana in the context of Uganda. So if I'm measuring climate change and I put my thermometers around Kampala or the central business district, I'm likely to get false readings. And according to that meteorologist Anthony Watts of Heartland Institute, these are what is being recorded. And then 96% of this is really fake data. So if they wanted real data about climate change, these sensors ought to be put in places like forests, in the context of Uganda, Mabira Forest, or maybe Udongo Forest, or Independent Forest, because that is where the nature is. There are not so many buildings, there are not so many cars to emit this kind of heat to give us fake readings.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
Climate change is an Africa's problem and a global problem. If Africa belongs to the globe, then climate change is a real problem to Africa.
Okay, that one is okay, but who is in charge? Who is responsible?
I'm coming, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
Before I go very far, I would also like to disregard with my colleague that climate change is not theory. It is happening. We are seeing it. When we talk about prolonged droughts, it is climate change. When we talk about flooding, it is climate change. The rising sea levels, the reduction of rainfall, the starvation of people like in Karamoja and in the northern Africa, it is climate change. When we talk about the hurricanes in the outside world of Africa and along the Atlantic and Pacific, it is climate change. So it is not theory that we shall not say climate change is not affecting Africa when we are seeing the impacts of climate change in Africa. So, my dear colleague, we have a threat and it is climate change. Some sources have it that the most vulnerable continent on earth is Africa. However, much it is not the biggest polluter. In fact, it is not the polluter of the. So, being vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, that means that is already a threat. Now, our biggest threat as Africans is that it is affecting development in Africa. Most of the sectors on which development efforts focus are climate sensitive. So Africans will have sectors that are driving our development. One of them is agriculture. When we talk of health, when we talk of energy, when we talk of transport, and when we talk of sectors like the water resources, all those are climate sensitive. The moment you tackle there like this, arrogantly, then the impact of climate change will come through. So here we are saying our development is hindered by the impact of climate change as a result of the people in the global north. When I talk of global north, by the way, there is something very funny. When they talk of global south countries, we mean low development countries. But the G27 includes China as a developing nation, yet it is the biggest polluter, right? And now, when you are looking for funding for adaptation, mitigation, and also supporting developing countries, still China accounts for the biggest percentage of funding to solve the issue of climate change. So there we have a problem, and it is a threat. We should sort it in a way of making the demands. In a region where I come from, which is Rwenzori, in a district where I am born from, which is Kasese, we receive floods. And the people of Kasese are farmers, good farmers. When floods happen, crops are washed away. There is no living, there is no food, there is no money. Level of education, schools are taken away. So economic development, when our agriculture sector is affected, then the transformation and economic development is also affected. Then there is the impact of climate change is displacement. That's where I'm disagreeing with my colleague. We are seeing a lot of displacement. People who have been shifted from their original homes because of floods, because of landslides. In fact, on the African continent, the climate change is a security issue. People create political tensions because they think government is not doing much. Yet government has nothing to do with development. At the end of it, demonstrations, political tensions, and etc. If we don't act, famine will increase, and when the famine is there, that is hunger, I think. We are people who are producing food. In my conclusion,
Yes.
climate change is a threat to Africa, and also it will affect this generation badly and the generation to come.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
It is an irrefutable verity that Africa is not one of the biggest polluters globally. But it is also a notable fact that because of the socio-economic being of Africa and her environmental characteristics, she is the first threat of climate change. When you look at the various sectors, the temperature increase, the precipitation patterns, food security, meat, water security, and the fact that our ecosystem is very fragile from the point that the savanna and the forests that we have, and of course every other bit of the ecosystem. The previous speakers have really done so well to pinch into that. But my point of interest this evening would be about the angle that we are choosing to address this calamity. Draw back to our African setting, that the garden that fed the entire community was often entitled to protection and preservation by everybody in that community. Not because they loved the garden, but they were preserving tomorrow. If that garden got destroyed, that means that entire community would have nothing to eat. Now, there have been quite a number of global climate agreements If we can remember the Paris Agreement that was there in 2015. Now, this Paris Agreement was talking about how Africa adopts and the mitigation of climatical changes. One, it was held in Paris, France. Secondly, it noted that for the point of finance, developed countries were enshrined with the divine duty of providing finance for underdeveloped countries or developing countries to mitigate the effects of climate change. If you do not find it funny that at that point, the dead were fundraising for the sick, that is where we were. We also had the Africa Adaptation Initiative on Climate. Even that one was held by the United Nations. Now, the United Nations that is encompassed of countries that at the helm of pollution of the environment, telling Africa about how they should preserve their own. We've had quite a number of those initiatives. But right honorable speaker, you normally make a statement that says those that should be teaching are silent, while those that should be learning are everywhere shouting about everything they know nothing about. Now, the West is not supposed to be in a position to teach us how to preserve our climate and environment. And most importantly, not to be at the center of the many agreements and initiatives to protect climate change. But also, if I am to note very carefully, that the problem is also about Africans in totality. Isn't it quite clear that each time the West is interested in a certain aspect of Africa, they are interested because they are preserving an interest? This is their source of livelihood. This is their source of wealth. This is their source of raw materials. Now, if white men value our environment and they know the disadvantages and demerits that would curtail from those changes, that is why they are so much concerned about this. It is very lackadaisical that we Africans that should be preserving our own climate and environment are silent while all these things happen. I've had a comrade saying they should actually be compensated. But now, we must understand that if you are already a beneficiary of the spoils of a cataclysmic climatical occurrence, 100 billion shillings were allocated in 2015 at the Paris Agreement to African countries for the purpose of mitigating and handling climatic change. There are quite a number of fundings that have come in that direction as well, not to allege, but to state facts. So at that point, we are victims of a problem that we are selling out ourselves. Finally, and luckily enough, we are crying to those that are only taking advantage of problems that we have created. I beg to submit.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.
Climate change, you look at the average weather condition that has been recorded for over a long period of years. That can be over 30 to 50 years. It's not a matter of weeks per year, or 2 years, or 10 years. It takes quite some good time. So, because of climate change here in Africa and the whole world at large, we are going to look at both artificial and also the natural causes of the climate change. Artificial change, we look at more so the arms race and the military race in the world. First of all, one of these points, if you talk about the arms race, you are going to speak about the evolution of fighting weapons that these countries are producing. Because each of one of these superpowers want to be ahead of the other. For example, the known president of North Korea, Kim, whenever produces a missile, such kind of toxic weapons, and they are tested in the atmosphere, the ozone layer can be destroy it. Remember that hemisphere, it has a resosphere, thermosphere, and until you got the what? The sun itself. So whenever that resosphere, the thermosphere, and the hemisphere destroyed, what will happen? There will be direct sun rays that will be hit or strike the Earth's surface. And if they hit the Earth's surface, remember, a lot of global warming will rise up. And when this global warming rises up, in the effect of this, we'll find that we shall have to rains because the hemisphere cannot withhold and then put a sieve against that kind of what? Rainfall. That's one of what? Artificial what? Causes. And natural causes, we are going to look at volcanicity. If I talk about volcanicity, I'll be looking at the eruptions. For example, Nyiragongo, Democratic Republic of Congo, when they emit, when they are being emitted and they strike at the surface, this will increase the temperatures. And whenever that magma is emitted onto the Earth's surface, what will happen? It increases the heat. Remember that temperature is over 3,500 degrees and above. And that 3,500 degrees above, it cannot favor activities such as agriculture and other various human activities. I cannot say that it's a threat to Africa, no. It's our minds as Africans. If these European countries, they have their own agenda, they bring in terms of climate causes, climate change, that's when Africans also get opportunity. Because of the problem is Africans is poverty affecting us.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
My opinion is that the leaders increase the threat. You might find sometimes the threat is not there physically, but when they rectify these laws that they bring into the country, they make them domestic laws, and the people, they increase on that threat. For example, in Uganda, they rectified the 3 international conventions and agreements. This is the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change, and also the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement. My learned friend also talked about those. So, under climate change, I'm giving the legal framework. Under climate change, there are basic principles, so that these basic principles include the polluter pays principle. Everyone is talking about the China and other developed countries bringing in funds to facilitate the mitigation and everything. This money is not for free. Those countries, highly developed countries, they're given a mandate. They always they always conduct an EA, Environment Impact Assessment. So if they compact and they feel that the industries, that everything they are doing, if affects highly the environment, they're entitled to pay. That is the polluter pays principle. That money comes in these underdeveloping countries to facilitate environment and other activities. So if you see, if losing your industry or losing your economy and also paying for them, they do the paying. That's the money that you're talking about. It's where it comes from. Then there's also a principle of public trust. This is where we invest, like we give in, we as Africans, we give in our minerals, our environment to the government to protect it on behalf of us. So you can imagine you give people who are selfish in mind your environment, so they'll value their own interest, leaving alone the public. So they sell in the not game parks, like the game reserves, the forests and everything, for people to construct their hotels. E.g., is it Maria? Not Maria, Kibali. In Kamwenge, there is some hotel for some person. So at times our leaders, that we invest in powers as by the Constitution and the National.
You feel to mention the name of the owner of that hotel, or you don't know it?
No. I know him, but it's okay. Oh no.
You're a law student?
Yes.
You're avoiding legal.
Yeah. I don't want to be a victim. But I'm trying to bring up a point that our selfish desires of our leaders, that we are investing, like we are trusting our environment and other resources to other people that are betraying that. And they're also, on that hand, they're increasing the threat in a way they're rectifying these laws. And sometimes, for example, the Minister of Environment, that department, you find these people have no knowledge about the environmental law. They just go, they have those privileges. They just rectify, they don't know what is under. That is the biggest challenges we're having. For example, if they rectify that agreement or an convention, they will not come directly to impact it. They'll just come and place it. It's a climate change act. When you read through, it doesn't implement, like it gives guidelines, and there's no it's not clear actually. That is the challenge we are facing most, the impact of that.
They're diagnosing a problem, they're not giving medicine.
Exactly, they just make it to impress those people at the international level. They just receive them, put in. So I request all of us to be clear and know what's happening about climate change. We address our minds to these things. The United Nations from a convention on climate change.
But since you are a law student on environmental conservation?
Environmental law.
Environmental law. Do you think so far, the knowledge you have acquired, do you think that Africa's biggest problem is climate change?
It's not a problem.
It's not a problem.
Yeah. It's my argument is the leaders, the people who are heading, the people who are implementing these laws, the people who are making these laws, and the people who are ignorant. They just don't impress the other people, the international people, forgetting their own people.
Thank you so much.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
As an individual, I agree that Africa is really threatened, and I should say that Africa, with the issue concerning climate change, it is really a threat. I agree and I say yes. Because the continent is particularly vulnerable and it relies entirely on nature. Given our activity as Africans, we basically rely on agriculture. So we are really vulnerable, and climate change is a threat.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
I will admit that climate change is a threat to Africa because Africa is vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And what are those effects of climate change? Of course, there will be forced migration, there will be death of people, there will be destruction of property. And where there is destruction of property, of course you expect people you expect unemployment to arise. People will get unemployed, and there will be death, of course, resulting from floods and droughts.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
Actually, I would like to argue that yes, to a lesser extent, climate change is a threat to Africa. But we have more greater threats in this country, in this continent, and that's the leadership. Of recent, there's a lot going on in Congo and it's not being addressed by the mainstream media. Other people are terming it as a genocide. A lot of people are dying in Congo, and there's mining of cobalt, and no one is addressing it. These very people who claim to be fighting for climate justice are not addressing this, and that's because it's in their interest. This cobalt in Congo is taken to those countries that are great manufacturers of cars, batteries, phones, and this is what we call modernity or civilization in the day-to-day generation. So, I want us to understand as well that even when it comes to a country level, before we start playing the hypocrite game of saying it's the white man trying to make it to seem like they still want to colonize us or terming it as neocolonialism. Today, if NEMA had interest of an investor coming to maybe want to develop an industry in the wetlands, they are willing to freely give out this land to this investor. But then these are the very people who are going to come out and say Ugandans are encroaching on land, they're encroaching on wetlands and everything. Of recent, there's some tribe in western Uganda, I have kind of forgotten. If I can explain better, these people are kind of short and they've been staying in the forests. That's where their livelihood is. And the government had to kick these people out of the forest, calling it government land and maybe, something that would be for tourists. But then, where are these people going to go? So, before we start talking about climate justice, I think we should come down to the decisions that are taken by the people in government, because these are posing more threats than climate justice may ever take on this planet. Thank you very much.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
We cannot neglect mentorship from Europe and America on climate change. Why? Because those people so far have experienced the consequences of climate change. So, let me take an example here. When an old man tells his son that my daughter, my son, take this route. If you take this route, you will succeed. If you take the other route, you will fail. Of course, you have to be submissive to take the route that he has advised. Absolutely.
Yes.
So
what point are you making?
So the problem here comes in their mentorship. The problems come in the way how they mentor us on climate change. How? Because they mentor us in terms of command. They command us. They put restrictions. For example, they wanted to stop this thing of the petroleum.
Yes,
Tanzania. So it's
Eco project.
So that is the reason as why we also deny and devalue their mentorship on climate change. I want to say that climate change, yes, it is a promising threat to Africa. Why? Because there is a lot of deposition of old fake automobiles in Africa here. There is a lot of importation of fake mobiles which have a high maximum carbon emission. You find a car moving on a road as if it is like a factory or a kitchen. So that is also one of the reasons I'm saying it is a promising threat to Africa.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament.
As young Pan-Africans, I would say yes, it is a threat to Africa. Though I have a controversy on who is imposing these policies or who is advising us on how to prevent or on how to control our way of living as far as climate change is concerned. However, our forefathers, they all knew the effects and the effects of climate change, and they all knew how to control it. But my question is, which methods are we using to control or to preserve our environment? You cannot tell me that you are preserving an environment when you are planting eucalyptus in wetlands. I often feel sad when I see people planting eucalyptus in swamps that they are preserving environment. And it has, in fact, in our area, it is so common and it has reduced drainage. Another thing, there is, our land is losing fertility simply because our farmers are applying artificial fertilizers and the artificial pesticides, and it is reducing the production in our agriculture. I would advise that, as this is a challenge, I'm challenging the climate activists who are here. Whenever you are planting trees, plant African Asian trees. Don't plant. I see people taking eucalyptus and other European species. Are you preserving the environment, or you are promoting dependence on the colonial masters? Start embracing Asian African trees. If we are not serious, in the conclusion, we are going to experience desert very soon. Because if we continue planting trees, if we continue planting eucalyptus around lake shores or around swamps, eventually we shall lose water. And at the end of the day, we shall be dependent on Western world, or we shall be dependent on other countries for food. Yet we have fertile lands. the way how we are controlling or how we are preserving the environment should be checked. I beg submit.
Free your mind now.
Climate change possesses a significant threat to Africa. The rising temperatures also increase the risks and disease and impact the ecosystem. Adoption measures and the international cooperations are crucial in mitigating these effects and build resilience in Africa's communities.
Free your mind now.
Thank you so much. This is the Pan-African Pyramid Show, and I'm closing this session tonight here. Till next Friday. My name is Andrew Irumba Katusabe. Thank you.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.